What's up, world? Welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be setting up the basis for our game engine. We're going to be breaking out the create render pipeline state function in our GameView into multiple library classes. We will have a shader library, a render pipeline descriptor library, a vertex descriptor library, and a render pipeline state library once this is over, and we can reuse those objects. We'll create them at the very beginning of the program, and then we can reuse those objects over and over and over again throughout the lifetime of our application. So if we wanted to add objects, all we need to do is grab them from the library as opposed to create them on the fly. So it'll make our game a lot faster, it'll make it more efficient, it'll make it easier to read, and this is going to be the basis for both a 2D and a 3D game engine. So you can break this out into both of those, which is pretty dope. So with the consequence of this is it's a little bit longer than the previous episodes, but that's okay. If you don't want to watch this whole thing and you kind of get the idea after minute 10, go ahead and just pick up the code out of the description. It's a lot easier to do that, and then just hit the like button for me, because that keeps me motivated, you know what I mean? So this is exciting. I love this type of stuff. All I do is read data structure patterns for game engines, so I like this one. I think you're gonna like it too. Let's go. Okay, so to start off, I just want to show you that I made a couple groups. The first group being core. The core is going to be the top level, basically objects that we need to grab. They're going to be available throughout the entire application. Libraries, we're going to create our libraries in here, which I'll talk about in a second. Our shaders group, where we're going to store our myshaders.metal for now. We'll put other shaders in there also. And then the display will hold the game view and the main storyboard. So these are the four groups I created. Let's do that. I'll give you time. Go ahead. All right, that's enough time for you. Now that we have those groups, we can start putting files in them. But I do want to go back up to types real quick and just show you that we don't necessarily need to have these as functions. I know in the last episode they were functions. I already kind of corrected them. But this says size int as a function. Just turn them into variables, and then you can remove these functions up here. And then it'll build just fine and everything's happy. And then inside of GameView, as opposed to calling .stride as a function, we can call .stride as a property on the object vertex or on the type, which is pretty sweet. So just do that real quick, easy peasy. Next thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about the GameView. What is the GameView? The GameView is a view. Its job is not to render things, although there is a draw function on this view. Really, we want to make the job of the view, so we can change it to whatever view we want, to be just to set up view stuff. So mouse position or key input on this current view, that's what should go inside this file. Really what we need for this entire thing is a file called a renderer. So we're going to extract this all into a renderer file. But before we do that, I want to just kind of point out that the command queue and the device are objects that we create one time at the very beginning of the entire application process, and we never reinstantiate them or get rid of them. They're always going to be there. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to extract these guys out of this initializer. Well, I'm going to keep this in the initializer, but then I'm going to pass it through to a singleton object. A singleton object is a class that doesn't necessarily need to be instantiated. We're going to instantiate ours, but it's just so that we can say, it's going to be called engine. So engine.device, as opposed to passing this device through parameters all over the place. So let's just get into that. So up in core, I'm going to create a new file, metal class. I already created my own metal class. If you guys want to know how to do that, hit me up on Discord. I'll show you how to make your own template files. It's pretty awesome. So class engine, and inside of here, I'm going to create a property called device. Okay, so I didn't just create the device, I also created this function. We're going to call engine.ignite at the very start of this entire application. That will pass the device, and we'll set the singleton's objects to device. Really, we could use an instance class here, so we can call engine.instance. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do it this way for now, because I know I'm going to keep it small enough to where it's just me working on it. It's not a bunch of people, random people touching my code, and I'll know that this engine is my singleton, and I don't need to reinstantiate it again. So where we call ignite from now is back in the game view, right under device, self.device, right, we have the device. Let's initialize it. We can call engine.ignite, and we can pass our device just like so. And so now everywhere in the application that we're using device, we don't need to use this local device. We can use the engine.device. So right here, I'm going to put engine.device. Device right here. New device right there. Boom. So in those 3 spots, I'm going to replace the device. I'm sure there's another one or another 5, or I don't know. Anyway, so now that we've created this engine.ignite, we don't need to worry about that. The clear color is set to this clear color right here. I'm going to create inside this engine function class, I'm going to create an enumeration called clear colors, and then we're just going to use that. So I'll show you what I mean right now. Okay, so I copied and pasted it from something else that I already had because I already liked it. I like these colors that I picked. But what I'm going to do, actually, I changed my mind. I'm not going to put these clear colors in this engine object. I'm going to create one more file, and I'm going to call it preferences. And what's going in the preferences file, is kind of just user preferences, class preferences, any kind of preference that we want. So take it out of engine, put it in preference. We'll put it in here. So this will be all of our preferences, including clear color. So for preferences, it's also going to be a singleton. I'm in love with singletons today, all right? Leave me alone. If you have a better solution to this, let me know, and I might implement it and maybe give you a shout out. Who knows? So I'm going to create a public static var clear color, and I'm going to set that to equals clear colors dot whatever I want, so green. So now I have this preferences dot clear color, and I said I'm going to make those capitalized. Clear color. So back in GameView, I can say clear color equals preferences dot clear color. Beautiful. As opposed to that, I'm also going to do it for, so we're using this color pixel format in 2 places. Probably going to do it with that, so I'm going to do that right now. So in preferences, I'm going to create another variable called public static var. How about main pixel format, which will be an MTL format, pixel format, which equals MTL pixel format dot BGRA8 unorm. And since we're using that for both the render pipeline descriptor and our displays drawable, we can just call, as opposed to down here, I can call preferences dot main pixel format, and also where I'm setting the draw to there, preferences dot main pixel format. One more thing I'm going to set up is this command queue. The command queue is also another object that we're going to create one time. Actually, it's one time per GPU you have, but since I only have one and I plan on only using one, because this isn't going to be too crazy of an engine, I'm going to just get rid of it here. Yeah, I know, you're scared. You're like, where's our command queue? And we're going to put it in engine. So we have our device. Why not create a public static var command queue and just access that up here on the engine? So self.command queue equals, well, we have our device dot make command queue. So now inside of our game view, I say so now so much. I know, guys, I'm sorry. Not really. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. We have our command queue, and down here, if I build, it's going to say, you don't have a command queue. Command queue.make buffer. Well, let's just call engine.make command queue.make buffer. And it's happy. Maybe it's happy. I don't know. It's taking its sweet time. I'm going to just wait around. Yep. So we have our engine.command buffer now. So cool. Now all this, now most of this can be moved, and we're going to do that now. The next thing we're going to do with all this code, so we have this create render pipeline state, and if you look at this function right here, we have what I like to call libraries. We can make libraries with this because this is made on runtime right now. The Vertex Descriptor is made at runtime. Okay, so the idea is that every object in our game is going to have a render pipeline state object. I don't want to keep creating them over and over again because that's bad. They take up a lot of resources when you create them. They're expensive. And what we want to do is we want to cache them. So once we create them upon the game, so we're going to start up the game and the game is going to start rolling, and we're going to cache all of this information. And once it's cached, we can then grab from that cache over and over again. And it's very easy to do. So let's start with the library, the shader functions. So over here in the libraries, I'm gonna create one library, and then I'm just gonna kind of explain it, and then I'll create the other ones, and you guys can copy that code. I'll show you the code, but I want to make this episode a little quick, so I'll show you what I'm doing, and then just I'll explain it, I promise. So this will be called shader library, and it will consist of our library. So our library, I'm going to create the key and the value. So we have the key and the value. The key lookup is going to be an enumeration, and that enumeration is going to be this. So Vertex shader types is an enumeration, and we have basic, right? So these are going to be our key. We're going to create a cache of fragment shaders and a cache of vertex shaders. That way we can just grab them anytime we want. But the value, so we have the key. Now what's the value? The value is going to be our own shader. And I know it's probably, you're like, well, we should just make the value the MTL shader, right? Or MTL function. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to create our own function, or our own class, or our struct, and it's going to go like this. Okay, so I actually changed it from a struct to a protocol because we're going to want to reuse this type over and over again. We're going to want to extend it. So basically what it will have is we'll have a name, and that will just be like basic vertex shader with spaces and caps, and we can do some descriptions in there if we wanted to. That way when we're debugging, we can see what shader it is. The function name is going to be what function name is in my shaders.metal. So in our vertex shaders case, it'll be basic vertex shader, just like so. And also our function is going to be that actual function that lives, that we need to populate in our vertex descriptor. So I'm going to implement this one time, and I'll explain it in just a second. Okay, so I need to instantiate this function, but I also need a library, right? In our GameView, we had this library object that we used to create our functions. So inside of our shader library, up at the very top of shader library, I'm going to create public static var, how about default library, MTL library, and I will, when I call public static func initialize, I will say default library equals engine.device.make default library. Cool. So now I actually have the shader library .default library too, which is pretty sweet. And we can create multiple of these libraries and reuse them over and over again. It's freaking out on me. I don't know why. So function equals default library. Default library .make function. Cool. So yeah, shader library .default library .make function. And underneath this, we'll need to return this function. And in between that, I don't know if okay, all right. Did I mean to use something? Okay, sure. And then I can say function. I think I can set it on the function. I'm actually not sure. This is just equals name. Is this a thing? Yes. So when we pass it through the GPU, we can set the label of the function to the name of it, and the name can be descriptive or whatever. So we have a basic vertex shader. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to just make a basic fragment shader also. Boom. That was easy. So we have our basic vertex shader, our basic fragment shader. We can set, like, if we really wanted to, we can say like function.set any property that we want on here. So function dot, if we wanted to set the function type on there, or whatever we want to do, we can do it all right here. We can set attributes, we can set argument buffers, all that stuff right here in our vertex shader, which is kind of cool for that function. Now let's implement the cache system that will be used to grab these. So I need to be able to grab this basic vertex shader over and over and over again, but it'll be the same exact instantiation. So let's do that up here. I'm gonna start with private static var, and what we're gonna create is a dictionary, right? So a dictionary is like key value lookup. It's a hash. And like I said, we're going to use this as the key and these types as the value, these objects as the value. So public static var, I'm going to call this shaders, and this will be a dictionary. This is how you do dictionary. You say, well, we have vertex shader types and fragment shader types. Well, this will be fragment shaders. How about, okay, yeah, this will be vertex shaders. Sorry, guys. Shaders. And this will be vertex shader types as the key. And then the value will be obviously our shader, because we're using some protocol inheritance type stuff. Cool. So now we have vertex shaders. I'm going to really quick copy this and create our fragment shaders as well while I'm at it. And boom, we have a hash of vertex shaders and fragment shaders that we can grab from anywhere. Well, not necessarily, they're private. We need a way to grab them, and we also need to initialize them. So below here, I'm going to create public static func create, and I'm going to call this default shaders, because we may need to add a function later on to say like add shader, and we'll pass in some parameters and add that shader. But for now, we're just going to create the default ones, which is the basic and the basic. So really what we can do is just say, let's do the vertex shaders first. So we can just say vertex shaders, that's this guy, dot set a value and key for basic. And we're going to set it to a basic vertex shader. And then we won't ever use that class again. It'll be done. Well, at least like we won't instantiate another one. And then we're going to do the same thing for fragment shaders. All right, so now that we've created our caches of vertex and fragments at the very beginning, so we need to call initialize from somewhere, obviously. And we'll do that in engine. So I'll go over to engine real quick, right where we create the command queue. I'm just gonna go shader library.initialize, and that should pop it off. Get it going. Shader library.initialize. We need a way to grab these vertex shaders and fragment shaders. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create two functions. Up here, I also need to do fragment shader types. So the fragment shader is going to have a key of fragment shader type, and the vertex will have it a vertex shader type. Now if I build, everything should be grand and dandy, and this is how I'm going to build all my libraries. So I'm going to need three other libraries: the Vertex Descriptor, the Render Pipeline State, and the Render Pipeline Descriptor. I'm going to create three other libraries, hopefully pretty quickly, because I don't want this video to go on too long. But let's just talk a little bit about what we're doing with these libraries and why they're so awesome. So basically, this is a shader library. It's a library where you can go and you can pick out books at your leisure, and you can just grab them, and they always exist. If you've made them, if they've been written, I guess. This metaphor is kind of bad, but it's not bad. Right here, we need to also call create default shader. So we call initialize. Initialize sets our default library right here, and it also creates the default shaders by adding these new objects right here to these caches, to these libraries, to these dictionaries. And then we can grab them by calling shader library.vertex with the type, and it will return it. So to prove this to you, inside of GameView, I'm going to go down to where we're calling all of this jazzness, right? And I'm just going to delete it. And where we're setting the fragment function and vertex function, I'm going to call shader library.vertex of .basic. Look at that. Oh yeah. And since it's cached, and we probably do some checking with the cache stuff. Oh, that's not, let me make sure I'm doing this in the right. Vertex function, fragment function is going to be shader library.fragment. And really, yeah, I could do like if exists inside the update value. Really doesn't matter because it'll just update it to a new of the same object. Yeah, this is a basic. Look at this. Look at these 2 lines of code. So simple. We don't need all that crap up there. If we ever want to add a shader, if I'm ever like, hey guys, go in here, add another shader, it'll be as easy as adding a type for that shader, creating the object of that shader, and then saying add it right here. This will handle the rest. It'll be super simple. So that is going to be our freaking library for shaders. I'm going to do the same thing for Vertex Descriptor. So I guess I'll tell you what I'm going to do. This right here is going to go inside of a library. That's right. So over in libraries, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it a Vertex Descriptor library. And you guessed it, I'm gonna implement this thing. So let me get at it. There's probably music on, so you can listen to the music. I'm gonna implement this, and then we'll talk a little bit about it once I'm done, because I don't want this to be too long. I promise I want you guys to be a little entertained by this. So one moment. All right, cool. So now I have done exactly, I mean, not exactly, but pretty much what I did with the shader library, which is pretty cool. We've created our enum type key. So we need a key to look up. With this case, it's just basic, because in the, just our basic Vertex descriptor has a position and a color. Really, if we wanted to just make a position, we could. I'm not gonna do that right now because I already have color implemented. But other than that, we have our key and we have our values, right? And so if we want to create another one, we just copy this guy basically, go down here and call it a different thing, and then we add it up here in the update value. Okay, so we're adding our we're gotta call initialize. So in engine, I also gotta call initialize. So shader library first, remember that. Vertex descriptor library can go second. And actually, yeah, that definitely needs to go second, because render pipeline descriptors need vertex descriptors and shaders. So that will go right here, but I'm not gonna do that yet. So let's talk a little bit more about this. I'm adding the basic value, and then I can call this descriptor from inside the game view. So as opposed to having this vertex descriptor in create render pipeline state, let's delete it. Pretty freaking cool. And right here where we're saying vertex descriptor, we can just say vertex descriptor library. Oh my gosh. Dot descriptor dot basic. Look at that. We can make as many of these as we want. If we want to make a turtle, a turtle vertex descriptor, we can really easily. And then we just have to call this anywhere we're making render pipeline states, which will probably just be in the library, but doesn't matter. Pretty cool. Let's make a render pipeline descriptor library. Same way. So up in libraries, I'm gonna create a new file. I'm gonna call it render pipeline descriptor. I know it's a long one. Library. And just like before, I'm gonna implement this, and you can just listen and watch or fast forward. I don't care. Do your thing. All right, so I think this is good. Just like before, I guess I'm breaking stuff, so that's cool. Let's see what happens. That should work. So just like before, creating the key, render pipeline descriptor type. The value is going to be these gentlemen, or gentle lady folk. We're gonna call descriptor to grab it from the render pipeline. So exactly the same stuff, you see? You see the pattern? Do you see the pattern I'm doing? So back in GameView, you can delete this trucker, and you can just call render pipeline descriptor library. Render pipeline descriptor library dot descriptor dot basic. Look at that. Trickle down, just trickles down. This create render pipeline state isn't going to be anything anymore because there's one more freaking library to do. Oh my God. It's the last one for a little while. So bear with me. We're gonna do basically the same exact thing, except this time we're gonna do it on render pipeline state. So this is the most important. Actually, you know what? Before I forget, render pipeline descriptor type library dot initialize. Almost forgot to initialize it. Make sure we instantiate that truck. Last one, render pipeline state. So we're gonna need every object to have a render pipeline state. Let's create a library for it. New file, metal class, render pipeline state library. Watch me work. All right, so pretty cool. I think this should build inside of our, okay, so let's just talk about it real quick, obviously, so we created our key. I've said it 100 times, I know. Here is our little class, here's our value, and we're doing exactly the same stuff as we did before in these other classes. Now inside engine, I can finally call render pipeline state library dot initialize. Boom, all of our libraries that we currently have right now have been initialized. Freaking initialized. Are you happy now? So inside here, we're obviously creating just the name, which is basic render pipeline state. I do want to point out that I did do try catch because it's mandatory around the make render pipeline state. But instead of doing just print error or whatever, I added my own little whatever. This shouldn't happen, but in case it does happen, we'll be ready for it. We have a lot of functionality within this little library class we just set up. We have our shader library, Vertex Descriptor, render pipeline descriptor, render pipeline state library, and inside GameView now, I can't breathe. We can get rid of this whole function, create render pipeline states. Are you happy now? Look at that. Obviously, the GameView is still doing other stuff besides GameView. Next week, I'll talk about the renderer class because I think this one's going on a little bit too far. I'll go ahead and talk about that then. We can get rid of this whole function call. Yeah, and instead of setting our render pipeline state right here, I'm going to just delete this line and make it separate. Oh, that's not what I meant. Right here. Instead of doing render pipeline state right there, we can do render pipeline state library dot pipeline state dot basic, and we have everything that we were doing before. I know you're like, God, when are we going to get into actual game engine pro? Well, this is game engine. We're building a freaking game engine, and what's kind of cool about this one is that it can be reused over and over again. You can restart from this exact same point. Well, actually, you'll probably want to do it in a couple episodes. But what we're building right now is kind of a starting point for a bunch of engines. If you want to make this could be your architecture for all of your engines, even 2D, 3D, doesn't matter. And that's what I'm trying to show you right now. So let's run it. Just make sure we get that same Coolio triangle. Look at that, beautiful. And I can change the preferences clear color real easy. Let's just make it white because we're cool like that. I'm gonna make it white, and we should have a white clear color. Just make it a little different, you know, because everyone's getting sick and tired of seeing this freaking clear color. Boom, gorgeous. Let's go to our, I just wanna make sure real quick, run through my code. Descriptor, probably capitalized. Make sure to capitalize this guy because that's the pattern that I'm going with. Look at that, bad. Going through, looking good. I'm gonna clean up this code a little bit. I shouldn't add or delete anymore, so if you did code along, good for you. But like I said before, you can find this code inside the description at my GitHub. If you want to just start from there, look at this, we're breaking stuff. Look at this. Sure. Make sure we build. Huh. Guess I'm gonna change a couple more things, huh? We need a descriptor right here. Okay, so now I promise, no code changes. I might add a couple comments just for your sake, but for the most part, we've created our engine libraries. And so we'll be able to make render pipeline states, render pipeline shader functions, vertex descriptors, render pipeline descriptors very easily now. Bada boom, bada bam. Boom, son. So yeah, hope you enjoyed watching this episode. Tune in next week. We're gonna cover the renderer class and probably make a game object class. So get pumped. If you watch this whole thing, you're a champion. I know it's kind of long, but hang in there. This is going to get fun. Like, it's already kind of fun, but it'll get moving forward. All right. Thanks for watching. See you later.